I was teaching a class in Berkeley, and it was called Creativity and Innovation. And in the end of my class, I wanted to crowdsource, essentially, in a very different way than I had normally, the most important points of the class. And I asked my students, what is your stickiest learning from the class? Most of my students wrote me a PowerPoint bullet or two. One of them sent me a PowerPoint deck. And this was my friend, Robert Chatwani, and I wanted to share with you his story. He told me the story of his best friend, Samir Bhatia, who was a Stanford undergraduate here about 10, 12 years ago, social entrepreneur. Garth had mentioned that many of the graduate students here and even undergraduates are creating careers which aren't necessarily nonprofit or for-profit, but they're building small startups where the social mission is baked into the business model and the brand. And that is very much what Samir was doing. He was leading, I think, this trend in what many call social entrepreneurship, but what we call simply when business meets meaning. And he was incubating little companies. He met and fell in love with a woman named Reena. And they were traveling in India about 5 or 6 months before my class when he felt hot and feverish. And he went to the hospital because he rarely felt that way, and they immediately diagnosed him with leukemia. He called Robert and told him the news, and Robert was shocked. And they reached out. He reached out to his network and learned that someone else, a friend of theirs, Vinay, also was battling leukemia, was diagnosed earlier than Samir, born here in Fremont, became a Boston doctor in Boston, also newly married. And so these two networks, which were unified by a common set of friends, started to work together. And I'm going to share with you in silence the deck that Robert shared with me. So Robert spent 3 hours at that very precious moment when Samir called him and constructed an email. And that email told the story of Samir so incredibly well, so compellingly, that people who read this email felt like they knew Samir even though they didn't meet him. And the call to action was so abundantly clear. First, get tested. And it's so easy. It's not even go find a registry event. Although that was easy to do because they were running many. Go online to the National Bone Marrow Registry, request a cheek swab kit. It's as simple as a Netflix model. For those of you who do Netflix, they'll send you a cheek swab kit in an envelope. You'll swab your cheek, fill out a form, send it back, 10 minutes, and you're in. Second, take this message and please share it with 10 of your friends and ask those 10 to make sure that they spread it to 10. And third, to learn more, come to our website. And then they harnessed social media. And then they took Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and were able to harness those networked capabilities. Instead of sitting down and saying, we'll just try our hardest and yell as loud as we can, they built out essentially two corporations, Team Samir and Team Vinay. And they had a corporate lead and a marketing lead and a regional lead, a team lead. And the only thing different than this from any other for-profit is instead of a revenue goal, the goal is 20,000 South Asians into the registry within weeks. A single focused goal. And they created websites, which honestly, 50% of the students that I meet now create their own websites nimbly within an afternoon. And they told the story again of Samir so well, and the call to action was abundantly clear. And they executed like crazy. They took this model. They knew that they had to change awareness of how hard this is to do or how difficult it is to actually give bone marrow if you're lucky enough to match. And so they had to change people's preconceptions, because before these pushes, people had thought that giving bone marrow was incredibly difficult. And yet, because of new technologies like peripheral blood stem cell transfer, these transfers are remarkably easy. The vast majority of us might take something as simple as 3 hours of blood transfusion, and now you've given bone marrow. So it's not like an organ donor. So they needed to educate, and then they needed to drive action. And then they wanted to harness both social media as well as traditional media to amplify each other. But the power of this framework is that if you double-click on any of these links, say you double-click on the corporate drive, up pops a bone marrow's drive dummies guide. And this is how do you do it. So let's say you work at Cisco, and you go and you get your bone marrow's dummy guide kit, and then you double-click on the red text, and up pops a letter. And you send that letter off to John Chambers. Dear John, I'd like to run a drive this Friday. This is what I need. This is why we're doing it. Cut, paste, send. And then they had a thank you letter. And so you just double-click on the thank you letter. We were able to get X amount of people into the registry last Friday. This is what we need to do next. Cut, paste, send. Because people often want to help, and yet we rarely architect for people to help a second time. We don't architect the ladder of engagement where if someone gives and they find that first experience to be valuable and useful and that they were powerful, that they in fact would like to do something again. How can you make it so easy for them to act? And people created widgets and Facebook ads, and they put them on their own Facebook pages. And people created videos calling individuals to actually get registered and dispelling myths about the bone marrow testing process, and posted them and spread them to their own networks. And the result in 11 weeks was 470 bone marrow drives, 24,611 people registered, and a perfect match was found for Samir in that time. And Vinay found a good match. And Samir shared his story from the hospital. He blogged prolifically because now he felt connected to 24,611 people who he never knew before, talking about the great appreciation he has for life, the opportunity to, with Vinay, have been able to make a difference, and also to have this hope and gift of life. And he even put his bone marrow transfer onto YouTube so that people could see that the bone marrow transfer process was not nearly as difficult as people think. And the lessons they learned were the power of a single focused goal. And it is remarkable how rare corporations or individuals within corporations are able to articulate a single focused goal. And yet for this campaign, the single focused goal was abundantly clear: 20,000 South Asians within weeks into the registry. The power of reversing the rules. How might others address this challenge? Could you do the opposite? So instead of saying, my doctors say that we have no match in the registry, could you say, what are the chances? Could you harness social media to actually help the doctors find a perfect match for Samir? What would it look like to run an actual corporation, but without the revenue goal, a goal of getting 20,000 South Asians in the registry? The power of telling a story. It's the stories that connect on an emotional level. It's the stories, when well told, that make you step closer to someone, or closer to a cause, or closer to a brand. And it's the stories poorly told or not told where it makes you step back when asked to participate. And maybe most importantly, the idea of designing for collaboration, designing it so that Robert, effective as he was, wouldn't have to be relied on to get all 24,611 people in the registry. He had to architect the campaign so that others could act. And that's a very different marketing campaign. When you're creating a campaign that is harnessed on the crowd, what kind of tools and templates do you need to give them in order for them to act easily? Samir, though, relapsed within 3 months of his transplant. And he fought hard, but passed on near the end of my class. And this is Samir and Reina 2 days before he passed on. And they celebrated his life by sharing his memorial service with the world, and they put his memorial on a global live webcast, and 6,000 people participated in the celebration of Samir. Vinay had a successful transplant, but also relapsed, and he went through alternative drug therapy, but passed on a few months after Samir did. But the reason why I'm here, and the reason why this story for me always stays fresh and in my mind in very, very powerful ways, is that out of the 24,611 people who were registered, 266 people were registered just in 1 year alone. And as some of you know, the chances of survival go up exponentially when you find a perfect match immediately. In fact, the odds of survival are 80% if you find an immediate perfect match, and they're as low as 40% if you don't immediately find that perfect match. So that's 266 people that don't have just the gift of hope because you're called and then you hear you have a match. It's the gift of time, and in that case, the gift of time means something incredibly valuable. A perfect match means, in this case, an 80% chance of life. And the final thoughts were that most revolutions are sparked by the actions of a few ordinary people, and your biggest asset is a clear mind and a large idea. So to find the ignition point and light it. And as I was listening to this story, as Robert shared it, all I could think about was, what do I do now? Could I water this story? Would this story grow? And how would that make me feel? And all I could think about was happy. So I talked to my husband and I said, okay, social media has something going for it. What could we do together, quickly, effectively, and powerfully, harnessing social media to do so? And we started collecting stories, and those stories were of individuals. Some of them within large corporations, some within startups, some within nonprofits, and some that had no organizational setting whatsoever. They were just individuals. And those individuals weren't just at nonprofits like Embrace, where Jane Chen has done a remarkable job in terms of taking a single focused goal of creating essentially a way for babies not to be malnutritious and die in developing countries, based out of her work here at Stanford, along with her other partners in the extreme affordability class. But Kiva, which was also born here and raised here with Jessica Jackley and Matt Flannery, and Charity Water and Twitter and Whole Foods and Tom's Shoes and Nike and eBay, and these companies, some of which might be more for-profit oriented and some of which might be nonprofit or social mission driven, all of them had stories of individuals where the individual was impassioned around something that was truly meaningful to him or her, and then they did a certain set of things, harnessed social media, and had significant impact. And as we dove into those stories and tried to peel apart which campaigns took flight versus those that stayed grounded, we found that all of them had a very common pattern or theme. And that common pattern or theme was that 4 activities were coordinated with precision and operating in sync. And those were, they all had a single focused goal. So when you ask them, what is your goal? Not only could they all respond to you immediately, but they didn't have 2 goals or 3 goals or a priority set of goals. They all had one very simple goal. And it is rare, it is powerful and also rare to find an individual within any setting that can say we have a single focused goal. But when you do and you're able to articulate that, the way of activating the masses is much more powerful. They all did things differently. They all reversed the rules or did things in ways that were unexpected. They were all storytellers and told stories incredibly compellingly and well. And again, most importantly, they all enabled for others to act. So there wasn't a brand or an organization or individual within these contexts that had high degrees of control. They were all setting up campaigns where others could act. And it might be other employees like eBay Green, which created an eBay Green team, which was based on a set of employees that were doing things within eBay that were sustainable. And then that eBay Green team became an external-facing sub-brand where clients of eBay could become part of the eBay Green team. And now eBay Green team is 500,000 people big. But they armed others to act. The dragonfly is the only insect that can fly in all directions when its four wings are operating in concert. And it's a symbol of happiness and transition. And this idea that small acts can create big change when four wings or four activities are coordinated, and when people engage in these small acts in repeated ways is the core of this idea around dragonfly effect. And I just wanted to underscore how powerful this is with the Samir story. They did not try and sign up every South Asian in the Bay Area. They only focused on those who were well-connected and those who were parents that could relate to Samir's story. In fact, the only money they spent was $80 on an email list with last names related to Bhatia. And they took that 400-person email list, and they targeted 100 of the most well-connected South Asians here in California. And they took their email to just those 500 people with those simple instructions of spreading. And that simple act of 500 people who could relate to Samir's story is what was the engine of the campaign. And they grabbed attention in unexpected ways. Robert handed Samir handed Samir a baby and took a picture of Samir and the baby and put it on the website. That's the only inauthentic part of this story, because they wanted people to see the website and see Samir as someone they could relate to. And they all engaged, and they didn't just engage by telling a story and speaking authentically. They personally connected and they matched the media. So YouTube, Vimeo, video channels become so much more powerful when story is part of the marketing campaign, and they harness that well. And then they enabled others to act. And what they did was create essentially tools and templates and a bias toward action, where the power of a good campaign is that others do what you do not expect, but because your goal is so singular and your story is so compelling, that the positive consequences of other people acting far outweigh the negative unintended consequences of those others acting. A single focused goal and a clear story that people relate to seem to be the key ingredients.